Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Stephen Trainer, and I will be taking us through this morning's session. Alice is downstairs helping run the webinar, and she will deal with any Q&A or technical stuff that comes up. So we're going to talk today about solar eclipses, and the reason for doing that is twofold. Firstly, there are two eclipses coming up within the next 12 months, which will be visible across a wide swathe of North America, one of them partly in South America as well. And to mark that, we've just launched some new solar eclipse planning tools within Photo Ephemeris in the web app, and that's app.photoephemeris.com. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about eclipses in general, and then we'll jump in and have a look at some of the new functionality. So let me just show you the quick agenda that I have put together. There we go. That was a little delay. So yeah, we're going to talk about the different types of solar eclipse and make sure everybody's got the sort of same grounding as to what we're talking about. We'll talk about eclipse paths, so where they move across the surface of the Earth. A thing called contact times, which is really the definition of key moments within the timeline of the eclipse. And then I'm going to show you some of the tools in the app, including the eclipse simulator, which will show you, give you a sense of what you will be seeing, things to expect during the event, and then we'll talk about some practical stuff around how to photograph these things, what to think about, what are the options, and so forth. I think when you, as I have spent an awful lot of time in the past few months learning about eclipses and how you calculate times and all this stuff, and there are a number of very expert people out there who know a ton about this and really dedicate, significant proportions of their lives to studying eclipses, traveling to see them. So there's a lot of great experts out there. I'm not a great expert, but I've learned quite a lot, and I probably know a fair amount for somebody who's only seen one of these things. But the tools that are in Photo Ephemeris, I think, will cover, I would say, 90% of anybody who wants to go and observe or photograph a solar eclipse. If you are in that expert group, there are far more advanced tools out there that will get into tiny, tiny nuances of timing and location and calculation that you can research. But this is hopefully a good place to start. So let's carry on here. What is a solar eclipse? Just to be clear, here's the diagram. This is from Wikipedia, so you can see this. If you look for the solar eclipse page in Wikipedia, you can read all this in detail. But here's the sun, long way away, large. There's the moon, much closer to Earth, small-ish. There's Earth, bigger than the moon. And what the diagram is showing is that at certain times, the moon is positioned in between the sun and the Earth, and it casts its shadow on the Earth. And there are two shadows, the penumbra and the umbra. The penumbra, which is the pale gray circle there, which I'm just moving the mouse around, arises because the sun is not an infinitesimally small light source. It's a disk. You see that when you glance at it in the sky with suitable eye protection. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Some of the rays come and cast the penumbra, and in this tiny disk, the black disk in the center, that is called the umbra, and that is the area of totality. So the sun's 400 times larger than the moon. It's roughly also 400 times farther away. And so they appear more or less the same size in the sky. It's roughly half a degree across in angular diameter. Astronomers typically talk about the semi-diameter, which you might think, well, why don't they call it the radius? I don't know. It's called the semi-diameter, and that's roughly just slightly more than 0.25 of a degree. So when the moon passes between the sun and the Earth, we have an eclipse. Let's just look at that in a little bit more detail. So if you're somewhere here on Earth while this eclipse is occurring, you don't see an eclipse. The sun is not obscured at all by the moon. If you're in the gray area, the penumbra, then that's a partial eclipse. You'll see part of the sun is chopped out by the moon. And if you happen to be in the umbra, that's where you're going to see a total eclipse or an annular eclipse. And I'll talk about that distinction shortly. So, key points. The three main types of eclipses: partial, total, annular. Partials are interesting. The real action happens with total eclipses in particular, and annular eclipses to a significant degree. Then I would say that I haven't seen an annular eclipse yet myself, but from photographs and reading about it, I think they are certainly very interesting and photographically attractive subjects, but perhaps don't quite have the spectacular visual aspects of a total eclipse. There are roughly two eclipses each year, more or less 6 months apart. That's to do with the nuances of the celestial mechanics and when things happen to align. You probably may have heard, oh, solar eclipses are very rare. And I think the qualification there is that in any one particular place on Earth, a solar eclipse is an uncommon event. There is a spot in the middle of the US, I think it might be called Carbondale, from memory, somewhere in Ohio, perhaps, somewhere sort of in the center of the country, that actually was crossed in the 2017 eclipse and will be in the path of the 2024 total eclipse. And that's a pretty unusual setup. A lot of places will not see an eclipse for 100 years or more, a total eclipse. A partial eclipse will last for a few hours, but totality will only ever last up to 7 minutes if you're staying in a single location. The path of totality moves, or the shadow of the moon moves across the Earth so fast that we can't really keep up with it, even trying to fly in a plane. It's just moving too fast. So what you see depends on where you are and when you're there. So that's what we'll talk about in terms of planning considerations. So here's a partial eclipse. This was taken in the 20th of March 2015 in Northumberland in England. It was not entirely surprisingly a cloudy day, but it actually makes quite a nice effect with the sun coming through. This is it's 72% obscured, so you'll hear a couple of terms: magnitude and obscuration, and they sort of mean the same thing, but they're mathematically differently defined. So the obscuration is possibly what many people may think of what magnitude really means, and they certainly are closely correlated. But the obscuration is the area of the sun's disk that is covered by the moon, and in this case, it's 72%. The magnitude is really the diameter of the moon versus the diameter of the sun. And so when the moon is close to the Earth, its semi-diameter is slightly larger than that of the sun, and so it can completely obscure the sun. And that's when the magnitude is greater than 1. We'll look at that in a bit more detail later on. Here's another partial eclipse. This was 20th of May 2012 in Boulder County, Colorado, just up the road. And one thing to take away from this is, yes, eclipses do occur at sunrise and sunset. This is not quite sunset because we're actually looking up at a ridgeline of the foothills, but it's low in the sky. It's maybe 3 or 4 degrees above the horizon at this point, and appears to be setting behind the hill. And the other thing to know is that an eclipse can only really occur at new moon. So the new moon, you'll know that you can't really see the moon in the sky at new moon because the sun is illuminating it pretty much from behind. Therefore, there is no illuminated fraction of the moon that we can see from Earth. And so when that's the case, that's when in certain situations of new moon, the total eclipse or a partial eclipse will occur. Now, let's talk about an annular eclipse. This was the same eclipse event, 20th of May 2012, but this is a photograph from Nevada taken by the user SMRGeog, credited here from Wikipedia. I haven't photographed an annular eclipse, so I had to source this image from Wikipedia. This is what is called the Ring of Fire eclipse. You can see why it's pretty obvious. It occurs in this way, it's not a total eclipse, when the moon is farther away from the Earth in its orbital cycle. So the distance is greater, the apparent semi-diameter that we see from Earth is smaller, and it's not quite enough to cover the full sun. So that's when the moon is sort of tending towards its apogee, which is its most distant point. So not completely obscured. Now let's talk about total eclipse. This is really the one I think we can all get pretty excited about. This was from the 2017 event. Then we went up to Alliance in Nebraska, paid $20 to a farmer to camp in his fields, and it was pretty close to what's called the central path. So that's where you get the longest duration of totality. This was taken more or less at the time of maximum eclipse, so when the sun is lying deepest in the shadow of the Earth. This was taken on a Nikon SLR, no filters, 300mm lens, I think, on full frame. What you're seeing here is what's called the corona. The corona is you can think of as the outer atmosphere of the sun. It extends for millions of miles around the sun itself. And its appearance is different for every eclipse that comes along. So this is how it appeared at the time of the 2017 eclipse. It's not how it appeared last month in Australia and East Timor on the April 20th eclipse. If you've seen photographs of that, it looked quite different. The sky is mostly dark during this period of an eclipse. Stars are visible. There's some star down here. I think I worked out what it was at some point, but I've forgotten. But the degree to which you see this dark sky and the degree to which you see this corona very much depends on your exposure. I have a link I'll share with you later on about some good tips for exposure planning. Here's another shot. And maybe if I go back and forth, you can see the subtle difference. So you see how this sort of extends a little bit further. Compare it here. This is a little bit shorter, and I think this was probably from a different bracketed sequence. And so how far you see the corona extending depends on the exposure, and you lose definition. The longer the exposure, the less definition you get closer to the sun. But the larger it looks. I think that's maybe a slightly longer exposure. I'm not sure. So these things change with your camera settings and so forth. Is the key point. So this photograph, which Janos took, this is of maybe just after what's called second contact, which is when the period of totality begins. And there are a few things just to point out here that you can see. There's a thing called the chromosphere at 7 o'clock. So you've still got some corona, but this is a shorter exposure. So there's far less of corona visible. But what is visible is this little pink band, sort of same color as my mouse pointer. And that's the chromosphere, which is the inner atmosphere of the sun. I think I've read it's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers in height above the what's called the photosphere, which is the blindingly bright part of the sun that illuminates our world. So that's the chromosphere at second contact. And then just peeking out over here is a solar prominence. So that's where you see a solar flare, the sorts of things that can cause the aurora to be visible, as it was earlier this year over large parts of the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. That's a prominence. And so these are things you can capture on in a shot without any particular filter required. You definitely want to be using filters during any of the partial phases of the eclipse, and you need to be using certified eye protection. So a proper solar filter, not a do-it-yourself cup. Stacked sunglasses are not going to cut it, etc. So I think Peter's posted a link here, and I haven't opened it yet, but I see that it says lensrentals.com, rental camera gear destroyed by the solar eclipse of 2017. So yeah, it can happen. I'll open that up in a while, and we'll take a look at what it says. Now we go to third contact, which is just at the end of totality. You can't see the chromosphere here, but you can see it here. And the solar prominences or flares, there's a couple more visible here, a tiny bit there, some here, and this one is taller than it was. And the reason the visibility of the chromosphere is moving is because the two bodies are passing like ships in the night. And so as the moon is moving away from the sun, the piece of the position angle on the sun's disk that is revealed at the end of the eclipse is different from what it was at the start. And that becomes extremely clear when you see this diamond ring effect. So this is a second or two, a few seconds after the end of the total phase. And the sun's photosphere, i.e. the very bright part, is emerging here at about 1 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock. The chromosphere, you can just sort of see it there. It's a little bit blown out. And there's still some corona visible. So the corona it sort of emerges, becomes visible just before totality. It remains visible a little while after totality. But the sky brightens quickly. The brightness of what's no longer obscured by the moon quickly overwhelms the visibility of the corona, and it disappears. And totality is done. So let's just recap some of this. So the contact times, this is the exciting one. C2, second contact, the start of totality. C3 is the end of totality. Somewhere in the middle is maximum eclipse. Now, I don't want you to conclude that the corona becomes significantly brighter at maximum eclipse. It doesn't really. It's pretty much the same as it is here and here. It's just these are different exposures in photographs. This is just before C2, so that's the diamond ring. We didn't capture the diamond ring at just before C2, so this photo flipped around basically, and there's the diamond ring just after C3. And then, of course, long before and long after all of this, this is the duration. This was about two and a half minutes, maybe in 2017. It'll be around 4 minutes in 2024. It varies from eclipse to eclipse. And the partial phase is starting maybe an hour and a half before and finishes an hour or an hour and a half afterwards. So that's our primer on eclipse contacts. So let's just talk about these upcoming dates, and then we're going to jump over into the app and go through the new tooling. So October 14th, 2023 is an annular eclipse. And this pink path here, the pink is, I chose A because it stands out really well on the map, and B, it's sort of the color of the chromosphere. So that's the sort of two reasons for it. But this is the path of the eclipse. We'll look at those in a little bit more detail, but you can see it's passing across a load of the US, down in Central America and across Brazil, out over into the Atlantic there. Then, so that's October 14th, 2023. After that, April 8th, 2024, the eclipse starts out over the Pacific, comes up over Mexico, crossing the coast in Sinaloa near the town of Mazatlan, comes up north of San Antonio, crosses Texas, scoots north, brushes Toronto. I think you have to be slightly south of Toronto to see it, and then out over the Atlantic provinces here and finishes out over the North Atlantic there. So that's April 8th, 2024. So if you haven't seen a total eclipse, I would strongly recommend that you, if you're able to, see if you can get to see this one. It's great. There are others coming up. So 2026 in August, there'll be an eclipse that's going to cross northern Spain. Also, it'll brush the west side of Iceland. 2028, I think it is in July, there's another fantastic eclipse crossing Australia. It'll pass right over Sydney. So it comes sort of down from the northwest, across the country, out into the Pacific over Sydney, straight over the centre of town, which is amazing. So that's that. Let me now move over here. Jay asks the question, Windsor, Ontario, Canada, will we see 100% totality in April of 2024? I'm organising a giant shooting party. Can you tell me how to guarantee the weather gods will cooperate? No, I cannot. But I will show you some resources that may help. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to switch over to use, I'm just going to use the satellite maps, the Google Maps for this. So I'm signed in with a Pro subscription. The Eclipse pads are available to all users on the free plan or the Pro plan. The rest of these tools require the Pro subscription. So that's what I'm using today. Now let's go to April 8th, oops, 2024. And here we are. Let's zoom in, and I'll just leave the Windsor. Now I know it's somewhere close, but I might have to search for it. So let me just put it in. Windsor. There we are. Okay. Oh, is that right? Oh yeah, that is right. Is that right? Yeah, I'm assuming yes. There we go. So I think it's pretty clear that Windsor is not in the path of totality. What this path is showing you, there are three things. One is the solid line there is the central line. That is where you'll see the longest duration of totality. So Jay said, okay, we got a different location. It's not quite Windsor. It is, let me type this in. And, there we are. Okay. Yeah, maybe. How about that? That seems plausible. Okay, is that it? Let me guess it's there. That looks like what we're probably talking about. So that is within the path of totality. The bounds here, there's the northern limit and the southern limit of the path. The eclipses always travel from a westerly to easterly direction. The only exception is really when things are happening up around the poles, where the geometry gets rather more complicated and messy. But anything sort of between the south of the Arctic Circle, north of the Antarctic Circle, that's what it's called, is generally just traversing the Earth. It's traveling across the Earth from the west to the east. It may track north, it may track south, it may track more or less straight along. This is the path for the April 2024 eclipse. Let's just look at some of the things we can see. Now, the date is set to the day of the eclipse. The time happens to be 9:48 in the evening. The sun is already down. The eclipse is happening in the afternoon. During the timeline, here are the new events you can see. First contact, C1. Second contact, max eclipse. Third contact, and fourth contact. Bob asks a good question. Am I correct that the full pink line is the path of totality, not just the narrow, darker pink band in the center of that? Bob, that's correct. This full pink line is the path of totality. Anywhere basically within this path, you should be able to see totality. I'll qualify that very slightly. If you were to stand right on the very limit of the path, there is some uncertainty around where totality is visible and not, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those factors later. If you're observing your first eclipse or your second eclipse, chances are you're going to want to sort of stay, safely within the bounds of the path. I would say anything sort of 10 kilometers, 6, 7 miles within the path, that's good. If you are confined to something nearer the edge, or you choose to go to nearer the edge, and there are good reasons to do that, but maybe not for people who've never seen a total eclipse before, generally you'd probably want to go more central, and this is where you'll get the longest duration. So here on this Point Palais, I'm guessing it may be pronounced or called, this is what we're going to see. The eclipse will start at 3:13 in the afternoon, totality. It will end 3 minutes later, roughly, and the magnitude of the eclipse is 1.009 P. Okay, thanks, Jay. It's going to last 3 minutes. Now, can we get a bit more detail on that? The answer is yes. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to click on New Moon, and you'll see why when I do so. As I click New Moon, what is displayed here is this new solar eclipse simulator. And we'll look at what this shows us. At the moment, this is showing that the moon is going to start taking a bite out of the sun. If you're an observer at this location, this is roughly what you're going to go see. Now I can zoom in and out on this. I'm using 2 fingers on a trackpad, which is called the scroll gesture. If you have a mouse, it might be a mouse wheel would do it, or it could be, I think, like one of the keyboard options, like Control Option or Command, or the Windows key if you're on the PC, and then drag up or down will change this zoom level. So I can advance the timeline as normal, and you can see things are changing as I do so. So there's how the sun is obscured, and you see the direction of the lines are overlaying one another. The azimuth lines to the moon and the sun, because they're, as you can see, they're pretty much in the same place in the sky. So let's go to this moment of second. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you what these controls are. In addition to using the timeline events, when the simulator is displayed, which is anytime you're in an eclipse situation, you can also jump to the relevant contact times using these buttons here. So C1 will take you to the start of the eclipse, and so there is nothing happening. If I click on the diamond, you can probably guess that a diamond before C2 is the diamond ring, and there is the diamond ring. So what this is showing is, here's the magnitude, it's just less than 1, which is consistent with a peak of the photosphere of the sun being visible. And the obscuration, which is this percentage over here, the sun is 99.98% obscured. What that means is that right up until this point, if you were to look at the sun, or even worse, look at the sun through a telescope and look at this area, you're risking eye damage. So this link here, and this little warning badge, tells you when that is the case. So that is any time other than between C2 and C3 in a total eclipse, not an annular eclipse. For an annular eclipse, you need eye protection throughout. But in totality, you don't need eye protection, and you don't need a solar filter on your camera lens, etc. But only during those times. So what the simulator does when you click the diamond there is it just sets things to 5 seconds before totality starts. So let's just click through to C2. At that point, we're seeing just the corona, and you can also maybe make out there's a hint of chromosphere there. This is all done programmatically, the chromosphere and the positions and everything. So basically what we did for this is look back at the photos we got from 2017, do all the calculations to get things positioned correctly, and create this simulation. So we're using images from 2017. The corona will not look like this in 2024. It may look similar, but chances are it'll be a different shape, different outline, which makes each one unique. If we advance to the max eclipse, the chromosphere is, in this case, not really visible anymore. In certain cases, it could be. The magnitude is at its highest value. We're 100% obscured. At C3, do you see that little shift there? If I go back there, here's the chromosphere and that prominence showing up there. Now let's go to the diamond ring, and that's where it's going to appear. So you can sort of get a sense of where things are going to happen. And these calculations, so this is called the position angle of the contact. And that is determined mathematically from the eclipse calculations, and is specific to the location that you have for observing. So it'll change as you move. So for example, let me just move down here. Let's look at where it is there. Quite different because we're on the other side of the path. If I go to a point on the central line here, there and there, you see how it sort of goes opposite when you're on the central line, but when you're on closer to the edge of the path, it's not moving quite as far around the perimeter of the sun. So a couple of other things to see here. If you click on C2, it will tell you how long it is until C3. So that basically is telling you the time of totality. So from this location, you get just shy of 3 minutes of totality for April 8th, 2024. And then as we finish, click on C3, we'll have an hour and 12 minutes roughly of partial eclipse still to go before things are going. Let's come back and show you one more thing with the simulator. You can do a playback. I'm going to do it five times real time, and I can click play. And so this is 5 times real time, and you can sort of watch this thing evolve. I'll zoom in a little bit as well. In fact, what I'll do, I'm going to hide both those just to make it a little bit larger. And we'll watch that once again. Pause, go back here, click play. So there's the diamond ring disappears, the chromosphere is visible but now disappearing. Zoom in a little bit more. We're 2 minutes to C3. So it's roughly 3 minutes. So when we're at roughly now, we're sort of at maximum eclipse. Now we're into the latter half of totality. Now we can sort of see, there we go, the prominence is coming out, the chromosphere will come out, and very soon, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, there's C3 in the diamond ring, and it's out. And then the sky will be brightening, and there we go. Now, if you're interested in sort of getting a sense of how the partial eclipse will progress, that's really what the 100 times real time is for, because it's such a long event that it's sort of a bit boring to watch it at real time or 5 times on a computer. But here at 100 times, you can see how the sun is emerging. Okay, so that's that. Let me put these back on. I see we've got a bunch of questions, so let me just have a look through those now. So Jay, hopefully that's gives you a good sense of what you're likely to see next April, weather permitting. Just so you get a sense of this, let me put the red pin on the central line. Clear the map out the way. Enable the geodetics tool. Grab the pin. Sort of measure the path width, and you can see that's 56 miles. Half of it is 56 miles, so it's like 112 miles wide at this point. The width does vary. It changes depending on the eclipse, and it changes depending on where you are on the path. But right here, there's quite a wide swathe of area where you'll be in totality. Randy says, I've got the Pro version. I selected Google Hybrid. I did April 8th. I don't see the pink path. Randy, what you might want to do is just try changing the date. Just try going advance one day, back one day. That might force it to load. Make sure you're zoomed out so that you're not sort of missing it because you zoomed into somewhere where you can't see it. If none of that works, drop the line. We'll work it out. Joe asks, are the Eclipse features available on the iPhone and iPad? Right now, no, they are available on the web app. I am going to turn my attentions over to the iOS version next and see if we can get some of this added in particular, probably the Eclipse paths and so forth. There is a sort of a more basic, much more basic version of the simulation that you see here that you will see in the iPhone and iPad already. So if you were to go to April 8th at this location and go to these times, you'd see it. It pops up then here on the altitude chart on that version. Brian asks, time of day at the bottom right, does it sync with time zone? I'm guessing, you probably mean this time of day here, Brian, which is the same as this time of day here. And the answer is yes, it accounts for time zone. So when you place the red pin, it is using it looks up the time zone for that location. So for example, I'll illustrate this. This is now saying we're in American New York time zone. So Eastern Daylight Time. If I drag the pin down here to Mexico, you'll see now that it has updated to the time zone American Mazatlan, which is more or less the same as Mountain Standard Time. And the times have adjusted. So this right here, the eclipse is happening at 10 past 11 in the morning. Chris asks, can you use GPS on your phone for the red pin? Yes, you can, Chris. There's a button just like this, which you can tap on your phone, and as long as you have location services enabled and have given permission to the app to access your location, it will position the red pin from where it detects the device to be. You can do a similar thing here. It's based on your IP address. It's accurate, usually to within maybe a couple of miles, something like that. That will generally work as well. Austin asks, is there a way to get email alerts for upcoming eclipses and other events in the sky? Currently, no, but that is something that we're looking into, and I hope to get that added so that we can have regular emails that would come out and basically tell you some of these key events. Well, that's one thing I skipped actually, is how do you find these eclipse events? Well, at the moment, you may well read about them in the press or elsewhere. You can always come into the event list here and look for these eclipse events. You'll sort of see the black little icon on the left, and select that. So let's maybe what I'll do, I will go to 2028. So I just changed the year to 2028. That'll pop up events for the year 2028. I'll scroll through, and there, for example, Friday the 21st of July 2028, there is a total solar eclipse. So I'll select that. No path. Where's the eclipse? Well, it is here. This is the one I mentioned earlier that crosses Sydney, and you can see that spectacular location of that central line. Doesn't quite go through the harbour bridge, but it's pretty damn close. If I center the pin, put it here on the, I bet this will be a classic shot. Go to the domain, something like that. You go to maximum eclipse. That's the Botanic Gardens in Sydney, so Adirondacks Peninsula. There'll be people, maybe they'll come something down here. I'm going to create crowds here now, aren't I? In 5 years' time. But there you go. There's the eclipsed sun and moon, Harbour Bridge, Sydney Opera House. They've got 3 minutes 48 of totality. There's the contact positions for that eclipse. So yeah, use the events list just to look for different events, and you can find them there. The information that is absolutely reliable here is the contact times. So when you place the pin, use these times are the best reliable thing to know what state the eclipse is going to be in. I could certainly expand and tell you a bit more about how this stuff is calculated, but the credit goes to, well, a whole bunch of people who worked out the methods, but there's a thing called the Baselian elements. It's basically a distillation of the position of the sun and the moon over the period of an eclipse into a set of parameters. And NASA, a gentleman called Fred Espenak, who did this for many years at NASA, and has calculated and published all of these Baselian elements for each eclipse. And once you have those, if you rummage around in all the right books and libraries, you can work out how to, from those, infer all of the positions and the timings and the things we're showing in the app here. So that's how that stuff gets calculated. Yeah, let's just talk about a couple of other things which I think are interesting. There was an article came out in Sky and Telescope magazine just 10 days ago, in fact, which was to do with the what you can see here called the hybrid eclipse, um, which was April 20th. And some of the photographs here are fantastic. You can see just the chromosphere and the prominences, really, really nicely done. And he basically jumped onto some, I think if I remember right, yeah, they landed a boat on some remote island off Western Australia. Look at that, fantastic. So if you've got a super long lens, you can absolutely capture this stuff. There's the corona, very different from the 2017 eclipse. This is an effect called Bailey's beads. So this is an interesting one. It's worth being aware of. I mentioned earlier that if you were on the edge of the eclipse path, let's just go to eclipse 2023. There we go. Go back there. Zoom out a little bit. This was last month's eclipse, and the location where these shots were taken was, I think, this island somewhere up here. This one of these. This is in this Sky and Telescope magazine article, and there's a few things to note. One is, do you see how narrow this eclipse path is? Let's just measure it just to get a sense of it. And this is where you really want to do your research on what eclipse you're going to be viewing. So remember, the one in 2024 was 112 miles wide. This one's 26 miles wide. And that is because the shadow of the moon is only just touching the Earth, so that the size of it physically on the Earth's surface is narrower. And when that happens, the magnitude is smaller at maximum eclipse. The duration of totality is much shorter. And what tends to happen is, because the moon is only just covering the sun, you tend to see the chromosphere, the prominences, and then these things called Bailey's beads. You see that here in this image. Those are much more commonly seen in these sort of more marginal eclipses. And the reason it's called a hybrid eclipse is that in this particular spot in Australia, it's total. But if you were to view it way down here, you see how the path is narrowing, it actually becomes an annular eclipse because of just the geometry of the sun and the moon. And so that's why it's hybrid. It means it's annular at the extremes of the path and total in an area in the middle of the path. But people who've seen a whole bunch of eclipses and have decided that they no longer always need to venture to the central line to maximize their time in totality, often seek out these more marginal events, or will deliberately position themselves towards the edges, primarily to see these sorts of effects. So they see them for less time, but it's stuff that you may not see if you're on the central line. So that's definitely something to be aware of. And the Bailey's beads here, they're caused by the topology of the moon's surface. It's quite hilly, mountainous craters. And what happens is that, depending on the eclipse and your location and the timing, you see glimpses of the sun's photosphere in the valleys of the moon itself. And these things can ripple around and come and go during the course of the eclipse. This is actually misspelled. It's Bailey without an E. I'm shocked that Sky and Telescope would get that wrong. And they were first described, although not first observed, but first described in scientific literature by a guy called Francis Bailey in 1836. That's where that term comes from. One other thing, this was an interesting post. This was from a 2010 eclipse. But this is in German, but basically it says, I observed the solar eclipse in Tahiti, where it was partial with 99.7% obscuration. And I just wanted to show you this because it really does emphasize the point that totality is not totality until you're at 100%. This is with 99.7%, and you see how bright that is. You do get little glimpses of the chromosphere here. This is just cloud. It's nothing to do with the eclipse. It's just cloud in the sky. You see little bits of prominences, tiny bit of chromosphere, but it's still pretty bright. It's impressive. You can see a tiny hint of corona. The corona was visible for about 20 seconds and was photographically, it appeared as a large diamond ring, is what it's saying. So yeah, if you can get to totality, definitely worth doing. So that's that. A couple of other things to show you here. If you click the info button here, it's going to open up a new page, and there is a whole article that describes everything I've shown today with a little bit more detail. A note on light protection, please always be mindful of that. Goes through the simulator, and then down the bottom here, I've got a section on photographic considerations. So let's just talk about that a little bit. Let's go back to the April 2024 event. So I'm going to go to, where shall I go to? Farmington, New Mexico. I'm just going to type Farmington, New Mexico. And we'll go to April 8th, 2024. Where's my path gone? Oh, wrong eclipse, not Farmington. That's a location for the annular eclipse. Let's just go somewhere down here in Texas, for example, and look at the circumstances of the eclipse. So we'll just go to second contact time. So photographically, there are sort of broadly three approaches you could take. One is to use a long telephoto lens. So let's say 300 millimeters or longer. Longer is better. Then you can get these sorts of images. So you can really focus in on the sun. You can capture the corona, the chromosphere, the prominences, maybe Baily's beads, diamond ring, all that stuff. And the corona you will see is going to be unique to that eclipse. And the orientation of the corona, i.e. it's sort of how you see it, depends on where you are on the path. So for example, just observe this one. Remember, this is the 2017 corona, so it's not going to be quite the same. But as I come up here to Kansas and go back to second contact, you see how it's rotated around. So the orientation varies with your location. But broadly speaking, assuming a lot of people go take their telephoto lenses and shoot this eclipse, you probably see a lot of similar shots. You're not going to have, you'll have something special for sure. And it's great to have this stuff. But it's not going to be sort of super rare. However, for this eclipse, you can see here second contact occurs with the sun and the moon at 68 degrees altitude. Now that is pretty high in the sky. You think, well, 90 is right above my head, but if you try looking up to 70 degrees, it's a long way up. And to capture a wide angle shot where you maybe include some landscape or even some topography or hills, you still need to have a pretty wide angle to get it wide enough to include the sun and the moon at 68 degrees. And when you're that wide, they're going to appear tiny, tiny, tiny in the shot. So you'll still see that it's an eclipse, but you're not going to see maybe much of the detail around the limb of the sun. So it could be that for this eclipse in this location, a telephoto shot is great. If you were to, let's say you chartered a sailboat and you went off here deep into the wilds of the Pacific. Now here, second contact is at the ends of the path. The ends of the path are defined by the times of sunrise or sunset. So if the sun is not above the horizon, you can't see the eclipse, so the path doesn't show it. But as you are located close to the ends of the path, you'll see here the sun's only 10 degrees above the horizon. So then a wide angle shot, even at 30 degrees above the horizon, that becomes much more achievable. And arguably, I think you could say that some of the most memorable images of the 2017 eclipse were the wide angle shots that were taken in, the the Grand Tetons, for example, with very distinct landscape, and the eclipsed sun in the sky above it. There's not another chance to photograph a totally eclipsed sun over Wyoming, certainly not in my lifetime. It's not going to happen again. So those sorts of things can be very unique, but I think you have to sort of keep it realistic as to what's really compositionally effective and achievable based on the circumstances of the eclipse and how high it's going to be in the sky and so forth. If you are shooting at an eclipse which happens with the sun lower towards the horizon, then maybe sort of a medium telephoto shot that includes, other bits of topography, sort of quasi and telephoto. That's also an option, but there are fewer circumstances possibly where that's likely to work. The other consideration is when you're going with the sun lower on the horizon, clouds can become much more of an issue, simply because they have height, and therefore as you stack them up towards the horizon, the chances that they obscure the sun are higher than if the sun is overhead. The gaps tend to be a bit more meaningful there. Okay, so we're an hour in. I think I've covered pretty much most of the material I wanted to talk about. Let me just check in on questions once again. Andrew, yeah, thank you for that comment. Andrew says, I found it valuable to have a written exposure plan. Those few minutes of the eclipse go by very fast. And don't forget to observe the eclipse yourself. Absolutely, that's fantastic advice. So let me jump back here, and I wanted to show you just a few resources. So let's look at this one first. So this is the Eclipse Safety link. This is NASA's page on eye safety during solar eclipse. Please review that. Be careful. Don't damage your equipment. Don't damage your eyesight, more importantly. That is worth reading. The second link is this article here that I was just talking about. So the photographic considerations I just sort of talked through are here as well. I've also included on this page in a couple of spots a link to this page. This was actually, it's been out there a long time, and it sort of refers to pre-digital cameras, I think, but it's a super nice, concise rundown of what to think about for exposure settings, the effect of focal length on how big the eclipsed sun will appear in your shot that we touched on, and a simple exposure guide. So I think you could use a resource like this to put together a plan. When Alice and I were shooting in 2017, we had two cameras set up, both with 300mm lenses, which was the longest we had, one on a crop frame sensor, one on a full frame sensor. I had mine set up to do exposure bracketing and just went through and bracketed everything, not being terribly confident of my ability to change exposure in a predictable way manually. So there are software out there that will actually automate all of the eclipse shooting for you. So it'll work out the timings, it'll fire off and a whole range of different exposures and shot plans. So if you're really into it, you may want to look into that. But this is a good resource, and indeed one of the points I think that he makes on this page is exactly as Andrew said, which is to take some time during totality to look yourself and just experience, and don't just look at the sun, look around, look at what's happening in the environment, look at the light towards the horizon, look at the shadows on the ground, listen to the wildlife, all that sort of stuff it's a unique experience. So definitely think about that. So that's this link here. Take screenshots, there are the links. Finally, let me just talk about this technical note. So here, I'll just click to it from here. If you're experienced in eclipse chasing and want to know the specifics of what Photo Ephemeris Web is doing, this is the page to read. So this tells where the data is coming from. It gives some qualifications to precision and limitations. broadly speaking, the things to worry about are if you're planning to go to the edge of the path, you probably want to read this and you probably want to consult other sources and really double, triple check your plans. There's a few other links there that can help with that. And we also talk about what the simulator does and does not do. So we don't account for the lunar limb. So that's the valleys and peaks of the limb. That can affect the contact times by a few seconds at the central path, maybe 10, 20 seconds even at the edge. We don't try to simulate Bailey's beads because we don't have the lunar limb profile in there. And we're not really dealing with refraction effects near the horizon. The app itself, obviously, the sunrise times, all of the times here are all corrected for refraction. But in the simulator, we're not really trying to simulate those effects at the moment, maybe in the future. And finally, if you have any questions, support@photoephemeris.com, you can always reach us there. So a couple more questions. Where are you planning to go? Mike asks, where are you planning to go for the 23 and 24 eclipses? I think for the 2023 one, we're probably going to land somewhere in the Four Corners region. I'll go back to that, October 20th, no, 14th, 2023. There we go. There we go. That was just a time zone update. There it is. You can see the path. It sort of crosses just south of Four Corners itself. So yeah, somewhere along there, I think. The weather's likely to be pretty good down there. Other places I've seen people talk about going to are down in the Yucatan Peninsula, which I think weather-wise could be good as well, and is relatively accessible. So yeah, that's the plan there. For April 8th, 2024, not decided yet. I think there is a site out there. Let me see if I can remember it. So file.com, I think it is. Yeah, there you go. This is another good one to know about. So this gentleman, Jay Anderson, has basically studied historical weather conditions for eclipse locations and talks about where's least likely to get clouded out. So you might want to have a look at that. It's pretty neat site. I think the guidance for 2024 is that the best chances of low cloud are across Mexico into Texas. The cloud probability increases as you start heading northeast. And if you're in Newfoundland in early April, who knows? maybe not a lot's going on. Sunshine wise, I don't know. We'll see. So that's that one. Is a star tracker useful? I'm not quite sure. Do you mean by that an equatorial mount, Andy? I'm guessing maybe that's what you mean. So that's where you can mount your camera on a motorized system that will track the lens to track the moon or the sun or a star, whatever you wanted to point it to. I think certainly I've never used one, so it's a little bit tricky for me to comment on. I know a lot of people do use them. They're probably more advanced photographers than I am. So it could be useful. I'm probably not the person to say definitively. The photographs I've shown you of the 2017 event were obtained just on a static tripod. And there's a tiny bit of repositioning as you go because it does move. Obviously that becomes more significant. If you were going to shoot with, say, a 800mm lens, maybe with a teleconverter, then possibly that would become much more significant because the field of view is so tight, the movement would be considerable. Rick asks, how many stops of bracketing do you recommend? I did 5, I think, Rick. Yeah, not sure. I would consult that Fred Espenak page and see what he says and get a sense of what the range is. Certainly to get sort of from chromosphere to full corona, that's helpful to have the bracketed sequence to do that, I found. Peter asks, I have a mirrorless camera so that there is no danger in viewing through my viewfinder, which is electronic, correct. However, do you know if it is possible to damage the camera sensor by pointing it directly at the sun? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is very much possible to do that because you're essentially focusing the light of the sun directly on your sensor, and it'll probably melt it. I bet that's what that link that Peter posted earlier is all about. There it is. How to melt your camera. I think that's telling us everything we need. Yes, you can melt your sensor. So get a solar filter from a reputable manufacturer. Order them early. They tend to sell out in advance of these types of events. Yes. So Andy's saying when during the 2017 event with a really long lens, the sun does move during the shots. It absolutely does, and the longer the focal length, the faster it will move. Yeah. Okay. I think that's pretty good. Great. Well, thanks so much everybody for joining. I'll just leave this resources slide up again if you haven't got a screen grab of that with the links. We'll be doing a few more improvements to this as time goes on, and hope that it brings some of this functionality to the other app versions as well over time. If you have any questions or comments, feedback on it, we'd love to hear. And best of luck to those of you who go to view the eclipses. I think they'll both be spectacular events, and look forward to seeing what you get photographically. Thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.